Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Recent events coming out of Saudi Arabia are truly stunning. Crown Prince Mohamed bin Salman is said to be a reformer and on an anti-corruption drive. Others say differently. Saudi Arabia is experiencing a life-threatening crisis that could ignite a region-wide conflict. And the Trump administration appears to be on board. Cross-talking Saudi Arabia, I'm joined by my guest, Martin J. in Beirut. He is a freelance broadcast journalist. Also in Beirut, we have Halim Shebaya. He is a political analyst. And in Washington, we have Joe Macaron. He is a policy analyst at the Arab Center, Washington, D.C. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Martin, let me go to you first in Beirut. There are so many elements of what's going on with the story domestically in Saudi Arabia and, of course, across the region, particularly in Lebanon, which of course always includes Iran. If you could, for our audience, because it's not getting a lot of airtime because of domestic politics in the U.S. and the U.K., how would you sum up what's actually going on in Saudi Arabia and in the region? Go ahead, Martin.
Well, there's a link between both of them. I mean, Saudi Arabia is basically getting ready for a new king to take the throne, and that is Mohammed bin Salman, the new crown prince, who has been installed in that position by Israel and America, and is very insecure about his position and very insecure about the future. So he's created a sort of anti-corruption purge, which no one really believes, and is basically wiping out all of the opposition, anybody who's a rival to him, anybody who could question him or doubt him and give him problems in the future. But concurrent to that, what we've seen in the last few weeks is more attacks on the Saudi capital from Yemen, which is linked to the whole Hariri thing, and basically a massive fuse blowing in Riyadh, where this entourage of people around Mohammed bin Salman have basically said, our man in Lebanon, Mr. Hariri, is not doing enough for us. He really hasn't done anything for us in the last year in terms of rebalancing this power balance that we have in the Middle East between, on the one side, Saudi Arabia and all the Western and Gulf Arab countries, and on the other side, Iran and its affiliates. Basically, Saudi Arabia has lost so much in the last 5 years that for this new Saudi prince to come into power, he needs to feel as though he's making a statement, he needs to send a message to Iran, but he also is sort of holding out a hand to Hezbollah via Hariri to say, can't you just give us a little bit back, just show a little bit of humility? We lost so much in Syria, we lost so much in Yemen, we've made fools of ourselves in Qatar.
But let me go to Joe. Is that how politics works in the Middle East? I mean, give me something? No, I don't think it works that way. I mean, Saudi foreign policy has been nothing less than a catastrophe over the last few years. I mean, and then going back in and meddling in Lebanon, trying to rebalance whatever that means. It's up to the Lebanese people to do that. What is, in your mind, what is going on in Saudi Arabia? Go ahead, Joe, in Washington.
I mean, obviously, there's an attempt to grab power. The Saudi political system became very complicated. A lot of princes, a lot of branches inside the ruling family that wants to control. And obviously, he wants to consolidate power since he came. He's on a fast track. He's making people worried, whether in Washington or in other capitals around the world. And this is not only impacting, of course, the Saudi internal dynamics. It's having impact on Lebanon, on Yemen, on Qatar. We saw so there's a little bit of accumulation of crisis in that sense. And for that reason, I see what's happening inside Lebanon is mostly linked to Saudi politics.
Right.
And this is the scary part in that sense.
Okay, well, Halim, if I can go to you, also in Beirut, I mean, if the Crown Prince wants to make a big splash, if I can use that term, well, it's all completely backfired on him in Lebanon. I mean, instead of seeding division, you've actually seen unity, and even quite a few Western players are a bit frustrated that, you know, Saudi Arabia is destabilizing Lebanon, and that's it's not very difficult to destabilize Lebanon. Lebanon's a very fragile place. Go ahead in Beirut.
Yep. Well, I'll just add to what the guest said before about Crown Prince bin Salman, is that, yes, on the one hand, he is trying to capitalize power prior to taking on the throne of the Saudi kingdom. But at the same time, he's kind of tapping into some reforms that have gotten a bit of positive review internally and also externally. So he's using that, perhaps, for example, beside the issue of the anti-reform agenda, he's using some of his statements on the need for social change and the need to, address change the way the country is going for the last 30 years with, giving women the right to drive and other issues, speaking to the youth. So that's on one hand kind of to also complete the picture in terms of what I believe Crown Prince bin Salman is doing. But also when we get to Lebanon, yes, indeed. I mean, we can't say with certainty that he has lost yet. Absolutely, as you rightly said, there has been a display of national unity given what has happened in the last 2 weeks or less than 2 weeks since Hariri's resignation, which was extremely bizarre. And it was described as bizarre not just by the anti-Hariri media or the pro-Hezbollah media. It was described as bizarre even by the international media, given that you have a prime minister who is missing in action in Riyadh. But at the moment, I just want to also add this issue, the point that anything we say at the moment is really uncertain, given that we have not heard from Hariri face to face. And he mentioned in his interview on Sunday, November 12th, that there are a lot of secrets that he can only tell when he comes to Lebanon and speak to President Aoun.
Okay, well, let me go back to Martin. Uncertainty is the worst thing you need in a situation like this here. I want to go back to the issue of reform, and we had the Crown Prince and people around him talking about moderate Islam. That is remarkable coming out of Riyadh. I mean, if he's, like a bull in a china shop with his Persian like that, I mean, does he could have the political strength, a base, to be able to do something like that? Because I have to wonder if that's just for Western consumption. That's my first takeaway. Go ahead, Martin.
No, I think you've banged the nail firmly on the head. Yes, the question that all journalists and analysts want to ask is the same one. How long will this guy be around? When you're going to those measures, when you're going to such extreme measures to create all this distraction, all this smoke and mirrors. I mean, the whole Hariri drama is in many ways a distraction from what's going on in Riyadh right now, which is chaos and calamity. I mean, what's not getting reported by Western journalists is the crackdown, the human rights abuses and the crackdown on people being detained without trial and even being beheaded. And some of these people are political opponents. So I don't think we can talk about reform. I mean, I think when Halim mentioned reform, I think he was very kind to MBS. I think letting women drive and maybe creating some program which may or may not work in 2030, and having a minister of fun is all really very superficial and doesn't really have that much substance to it. What we're seeing, I think, is Saudi Arabia going backwards. I don't see anything going forward. I'm not at all positive. And I think the fact that you need to go to those measures, you need to take those extremes, you need to use your man Hariri in Lebanon to try and destabilize a tiny country. And you said it yourself. It's easy to destabilize Lebanon. It's poor, it's backward. It basically hasn't really ever had a functional government in the 5 years I've been here. So it's low-hanging fruit in terms of shaking that particular country. But I mean, I don't think we can take this guy seriously. I mean, what's happened with the Hariri drama is the whole thing has massively backfired. Look what's happened in Lebanon. You'll find now.
It's nothing less than bizarre here. Let me go back to Joe here. I mean, we had the President of the United States, his first major foreign visit, and he went to, among the cities on his trip was to Riyadh. And the Twitter-in-chief is given full support to the Crown Prince here. Is there any cause and effect there? Because does he feel like he's got kind of like a blank check from the U.S.? Because maybe his Twitter account, that gives him a blank check from the president, but from the rest of the U.S. administration, it doesn't seem so clear. Again, this is very callous, risky behavior. Go ahead, Joe.
Yes, I mean, obviously there is some policy differences between the White House on one hand and then the State Department and the Pentagon on the other hand. We saw in the Qatar crisis, for them to bridge that difference took a while, and then eventually the president called Egyptian president when they were meeting in Cairo and asked them basically to stop the escalation. And basically they didn't force a solution on them, but they asked them to stop the escalation. In the case of Lebanon, that bridge was much quicker. I'm not sure, maybe because Tillerson was with Trump on the trip, but it became more, and basically the U.S. was able to curb the Saudi surge, if you're going to call it, in Lebanon, and basically tell them, tone down the rhetoric, the government gonna stay, we need stability, we're not gonna play with fire now. So we saw suddenly the Saudi rhetoric retreated in a very clear and gradual way, leading now to Hariri moving around. So yes, there's a big tension around this issue, and I think the concern is at the expense of building a good relation with Trump and his advisor, including Kushner, is coming at the expense of the Saudi relation with the U.S. establishment, because they feel now you are undercutting us.
Exactly.
We didn't know about Lebanon.
Exactly.
We didn't know about Qatar. You're just playing with fire, impacting our influence, our U.S. forces in Qatar, our U.S. influence in Lebanon.
Yeah, but
so we have to at some point be on the
exactly.
same wavelength.
I think we're agreeing here. Let me go, Halim. Let me go to you. I mean, again, because the position of the U.S. is very ambivalent here. Does it give the players on the ground a little bit more elbow room to do what they want to do? Because it seems like that's in play, including the Israelis, by the way. Go ahead.
Yes, I agree. But of course, we need to remember that we still, even when you're reading the U.S. press and other reports, we still don't know exactly what Trump's policy is in the Middle East. But having said that, we know one thing, is that he's decided to single out Iran as the main threat in the region. And in doing so, he has completely adopted the line of Israel and Saudi Arabia. Now, whether his plan is well thought out, whether he has practical steps in doing that, we know in the case of Lebanon, there has been increasing sanctions by the U.S. Congress against Hezbollah and against affiliated groups.
Gentlemen, I have to jump in here. We're going to go to a hard break, and after that break, we'll continue our discussion on Saudi Arabia and some on Iran. Stay with RT.
我叫张清标，今年18岁。
剃须刀，练武术，
少林鹅坡女院是我们学校的名字。
我们学校啊，按考试教武王教3年。
去人了！
你走了，你会走哪？
不要。
I've played for many clubs over the years, so I know the game inside out. Football isn't only about what happens on the pitch or the final score. It's about the passion from the fans. It's the age of the super manager, billionaire owners, and spending 220 million on one player. But it's an experience like nothing else on earth. And because I want to share what I think and what I know about the beautiful game, I agreed to one more transfer. And this is my new team.
When lawmakers manufacture consent instead of public wealth. When the ruling classes protect only themselves. When the financial merry-go-round lifts only the 1% up. It's time to ignore middle-of-the-road signals. Going underground, bringing real news to Britain and the world.
18 years ago, I travelled across the United States, exploring America's deadly love affair with the gun.
If a bad guy tried to get to one of my family members, he would have better luck with a butter knife against a grizzly bear than hurting one of my babies.
Since my book was published in the year 2000, more than 500,000 Americans have been killed by firearms in the USA.
We had a SWAT team, yes we did. Yes, this was in middle school. We go through drills and we put ourselves in real scenarios. It was interesting to see who actually got hit by the paintball gun.
I decided to return to the subject, to track down each gun owner who I'd met and photographed those years ago.
I don't know the answer, but we are not the problem.
Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing Saudi Arabia. Okay, Martin, let me go back to you. Halim brought up the topic where I wanted to go with on this program. Let's talk about the Iran angle here. I mean, it seems that that's part of the chessboard right here. Is the Crown Prince trying to make some kind of grand gesture, or leave his footprint in history? I mean, again, looking at what's going on in the region, failure in Syria, failure in Yemen. I mean, maybe you should kind of step back a little bit here, destabilizing Lebanon. I mean, now we have this rhetorical war, which is always there to one level or another. But I mean, it looks like he's priming up the region to get used to a conflict with Iran, and of course, the Israelis officially, unofficially, are always kind of egging that along there too. So, I mean, this is what I find very worrisome. Someone that is not experienced, coming in, like a China a bull in a China shop, kicking everything around, arresting people, worse, taking their assets away, and we have the U.S. that's kind of asleep at the wheel, seemingly at least. Martin, your thoughts, Iran?
Yeah, because basically, to sum it up, the American idea, or the Trump camp's idea, is that whatever we do with Iran in the Middle East, we can't really go wrong. There is this idea that there is a huge safety net there, and whatever they actually try and pull off, whatever initiative it is, whether it's a military one or whether it's what I believe will be an economic sanction crackdown, call it what you will, on Lebanon. They feel as though that there's no accountability. It's almost as though they're creating policies which, in 3, 4, or 5 years' time, they will not be accountable to anyway. But what we are seeing, what we're witnessing in the Middle East, particularly with Saudi Arabia and Lebanon, with this whole context of Iran, is Saudi Arabia and Israel coming closer and closer together, with this paranoia which is being stirred and provoked and goaded by the Trump administration, particularly since the not signing the certification for the Iran deal sign-off a couple of weeks ago. This just makes things much worse. The Hezbollah, who are believed to be in Yemen firing rockets at Riyadh, it's just stoking everything up, and it's reached a point now where no logical argument matters anymore. Just today, the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia said, we are talking now to our allies about a new policy towards Iran. Well, what does that mean? They cannot, in MBS's wildest dreams, he cannot possibly imagine a military campaign against Iran or Hezbollah in Lebanon. Can he? Can he be that mad?
Yeah, well, no. He's not mad. He's just going to get the Americans and the Israelis to do it, and that's what really worries me, okay? Joe, let me go to you. I mean,
that's not going to work.
I agree, okay? Martin, when has it worked recently, okay? And that's the whole point I want to go with Joe here in Washington. Okay, let's look at Iraq, okay? Iraq, after the illegal invasion and occupation in 2003, it falls into Iran's sphere of influence, okay? Now you have this proxy war in Syria. Who comes out the winner? Iran, okay? I mean, Hezbollah goes in and fights ISIS. So they carry water for the Iranians, okay? They win again. Now, why in the world would anyone on the crown of the Saudi royal family thinking they're going to throw the dice one more time? I mean, it's mistake, one after another. Oh, sorry, I forgot Yemen. Go ahead, Joe.
I mean, I believe that the Saudis, never have a plan to confront Iran. I mean, they never have the intention, to confront Iran, not in the past and not today. And this is why they went to what I call the weakest link, which is Lebanon and Yemen. This is where they can basically force the hand of Iran, but they cannot in Syria and they cannot in Iraq. So yes, the rhetoric, the US and Saudi rhetoric is basically getting higher or more tense with Iran in the past year or so. But this does not translate into policy on the ground, because we see in Syria there's an agreement now between the US and Russian. You see Iranian getting close to control the Iraqi-Syrian border. In the Iraq, you have Saudi engagement now. You have coexistence between the US and Iran and Iraq through Abbadi and through the stabilizing situation over there. So the rhetoric doesn't match what's happening on the ground. And this was the US message to Saudi Arabia, that we want Lebanon to explode everything for us, that it's very tricky what's happening. We have to deal with the situation in Syria, try to contain Iran. That's not the time to go into a conflict that's not a big priority for the US at this point, which is Lebanon. And you see now there's a completely shift in that sense. So again, I mean, the Saudi rhetoric does not match and will not match anytime soon the rhetoric, especially in Lebanon, where the Saudi options are very, very, very limited.
Yeah. Halim, let's talk more about Lebanon. I mean, I think we all can agree that it's not over yet, whatever this gambit is, okay? But, you know, the first signs they've solidified. I mean, people have come together. Explain to our viewers what kind of consensus is there now in dealing with this situation. They're seeing this foreign meddling from Saudi Arabia, and it's sent shivers through the spine of a lot of people, because, I mean, to remind our viewers, you know, people remember the war, the civil war. It was horrific, it was long, and they found some kind of consensus to move forward with lots of disagreements and a very complicated political system. Is it durable? Can it pull through this crisis? Go ahead in Beirut.
In my opinion, the consensus is that the Lebanese people do not want another war. They do not want to be dragged into another war on behalf of somebody else. But for the, for the sake of having also a comprehensive analysis of what the view is from Lebanon and also in the region, we need to talk about, obviously, Saudi interference, but we also need to talk about Iranian involvement in Lebanon. As you well know, Hezbollah is an Iranian ally and has a lot of, power in Lebanon, but it's also been involved in the Syria crisis and possibly in the Yemen crisis and in Iraq as well. So we can't really discuss Lebanon without talking about these two sides, which is usually what is discussed today as the regional power play between Saudi Arabia and Iran. So yes, in the last 2 weeks, Saudi Arabia's role interfering in Lebanon and what I consider to be an assault on Lebanon's sovereignty has come to the surface. But we also need to see that it's part of a bigger problem of both powers trying to interfere, trying to flex their muscles, so to speak. So let me also remind the viewers that part of what also Saudi Arabia claimed, at least, that this is all about, or what its allies in Lebanon were upset about, was President Rouhani of Iran, who mentioned 2 weeks ago, perhaps, that nothing happens in the region, including Lebanon, without the, without Iran's, so to speak, consent, so to speak. So in one way or another, one can see the Hariri resignation as Saudi Arabia saying, well, look, we can also influence things on the ground. We can, we can put a halt on a settlement that brought President Aoun to the presidency and Saad al-Hariri to the premiership. So in some ways, just to sum it up briefly, there is a consensus that we do not want a war. If Saudi Arabia wants a military confrontation with Hezbollah, it is my view that no party in Lebanon wants that. But at the same time, what the Hariri resignation brought forward is that there is a need to have a discussion about the status of Hezbollah going forward, and also whether Hezbollah should disengage from any regional conflicts.
Well, Martin may weigh in on that, because, I mean, Hezbollah would say nothing succeeds like success. I mean, they play their cards very, very carefully, okay? And they've come out on top. And they are also part of the political process. They are elected democratically, if you like it or not. Okay, so it seems to me that they have a pretty strong position in Lebanese politics. Okay, and they came about because of the illegal invasion of Israel. Okay, let's all remember the origins of all these things. Go ahead, Martin.
Well, yeah, I mean, Hezbollah started off as very much a nationalistic organization, but has grown and developed now into an organization which permits right across the region. You know, the problem we've got here is one of irony. The Saudis tried to take on Iran and Hezbollah's proxy around the region, and they lost. And every time they keep losing, Hezbollah keeps growing. You know, if you look at Hezbollah now, I mean, the Israeli generals, barely a week passes without Israeli generals in the press down there in Israel talking about the strength of Hezbollah since Hezbollah has come back from the war in Syria. So, you know, the joke of where does the 600-pound gorilla sit when it enters the room, anywhere it likes, applies very much to the situation that we have now between Saudi Arabia and Iran. The problem for the Saudis is Hezbollah has just become too big, too powerful across the region. And now the Saudis are negotiating from a point of weakness, not from a point of strength. You know, they've sort of kidnapped the Lebanese prime minister. We don't know exactly even where he is exactly or what he's doing in Saudi Arabia. There is this debacle now which has emerged between now the international community and France is trying to usher him back to France. There's a huge question mark over whether he will come back as a prime minister and do what everyone wants him to do, which is to talk to Hezbollah, because frankly he's the only one the Saudis have got who can actually be put into that circle and who will be listened to and who can communicate with Hezbollah and come out with a deal. But the million-dollar question is, do the Saudis really want to negotiate a deal? Because they had an opportunity and they seem to have lost it.
I agree.
Ironically, Hariri has become so popular in the last 2 weeks, more popular than he could be ever in an entire political career inside Lebanon, and yet the Saudis have not capitalized on that and said, let's put him back into Beirut to talk to Hezbollah.
Joe, weigh in on that. That's a very interesting way of looking at it. Go ahead, Joe, in Washington.
I mean, I agree that Hezbollah role in that sense has grown beyond its Lebanese role, and that should be discussed in a way that doesn't impact, you know, the way Lebanon has relation with the Arab world. And there's a concern about how Hezbollah is investing what's happening in Syria and Lebanese politics. I don't understand why they were rushed to normalization with Damascus. Those are all, I think, legal concerns, legitimate concern to have. But the issue is how Saudi Arabia approached this issue. I mean, the way they did it now, basically, they crippled their own ally. He's somehow now basically forced to resign. He had to change all his rhetoric. And this weakened him, and this is not the first time they weakened Hariri. They've been weakening him for almost 5 years now, whether in his company in Saudi Arabia, whether supporting people on his right. So basically, I mean, they should take a decision that what else they can do. I mean, if they're going to go war with Hezbollah, there's no one ready for that. If they want Israel to go to war with Hezbollah, they are not ready for that. If they want the Americans to do that, they are not ready to basically also paralyze the Lebanese government. So they have no game plan in that sense.
I have to jump in here. I think
no game plan.
We've run out of time. I think Joe has really put it really well. There's no game plan here. That's what worries me. Many thanks to my guests in Beirut and in Washington. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, Crosstalk rules.